Ingersoll's Lecture on Ghosts, Part 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. From the book Lectures of Colonel R.G. Ingersoll, Ingersoll's Lecture on Ghosts. Ladies and gentlemen, in the first place, allow me to tender my sincere thanks to the clergy of this city. I feel that I am greatly indebted to them for this magnificent audience. It has been said, and I believe it myself, that there is a vast amount of intolerance in the church of today. But when 24 clergymen, 3 of whom, I believe, are bishops, act as my advance agents, without expecting any remuneration or reward in this world, I must admit that perhaps I was mistaken on the question of intolerance. And I will say further, that against those men I have not the slightest feeling in the world. Every man is the product of his own surroundings. He is the product of every circumstance that has ever touched him. He is the product, to a certain degree, of the religion and creed of his day. And when men show the slightest intolerance, I blame the creed, I blame the religion, I blame the superstition that forced them to do so. I do not blame those men. Allow me to say further, that this world is not, in my judgment, yet perfect. I am doing in a very feeble way, to be sure, but I am still endeavoring, according to my idea, to make this world just a little better, to give a little more liberty to men, a little more liberty to women. I believe in the government of kindness. I believe in truth, in investigation, in free thought. I do not believe that the hand of want will be eternally extended to the world. I do not believe that the prison will forever scar the ground. I do not believe that the shadow of the gallows will forever curse the earth. I do not believe that it will always be true that the men who do the most work will have the least to wear and the least to eat. I do believe that the time will come when liberty and morality and justice, like the rings of Saturn, will surround the world, that the world will be better, and every true man and every free man will do what he can to hasten the coming of the religion of human advancement. I understand that for the thousands and thousands of years that have gone by, all questions have been settled by religion. I understand that during all this time the people have gotten their information from the sacerdotal class, from priests. I know that when India was supreme they worshipped Brahma and Vishnu, and that when Rome held in its hand the red sword of war they worshipped Jove. And I know now that our religion has swept to the top. Any man living in India a few hundred or thousand years ago would have said, this is the only true religion. Why? Because here is the only true civilization. A man afterward, living in Egypt, would have said, this is the only true religion, because we have the best civilization. A Greek in Athens would have said, this is the only true religion, and a Roman would have said, we have the true religion. And now, those religions all having died, although they were all true religions, we say ours is the only religion, because we are the greatest commercial nation in the world. There will come other nations. There will come other religions. Man has made every religion in this world, in my judgment, and the religion has been good or bad according as the men who made it were good or bad. If they were savages and barbarians, they made a god like the Jehovah of the Jews. If they were civilized, if they were kind and tender, they filled the heavens with kindness and love. Every man makes his own god. Show me the god a man worships, and I will tell you what kind of man he is. Everyone makes his own god. Everyone worships his own god. And if you are a civilized man, you will have a civilized god. And we have been civilizing ours for hundreds and hundreds of years. He is getting better every day. I am going to tell you tonight just exactly what I think. The other lecture I delivered here was my conservative lecture. This is my radical one. We even hear it suggested that our religion, our Bible, has given us all we have of prosperity and greatness and grandeur. I deny it. We have become civilized in spite of it, and I will show you tonight that the obstruction that every science has had is what we have been pleased to call our religion, or superstition. I had a conversation with a gentleman once, and these gentlemen are always mistaking something that goes along with a thing for the cause of the thing, and he stated to me that his particular religion was the cause of all advancement. I said to him, no, sir. The causes of all advancement, in my judgment, are plug hats and suspenders. And I said to him, you go to Turkey, where they are semi-barbarians, and you won't find a pair of suspenders or a plug hat in all that country. You go to Russia, and you will find now and then a pair of suspenders at Moscow or St. Petersburg. You go on down till you strike Austria, and black hats begin. Then you go on to Paris, Berlin, and New York, and you will find everybody wears suspenders and everybody wears black hats. Wherever you find education and music, there you will find black hats and suspenders. He said that any man who said to him that plug hats and suspenders had done more for mankind than the Bible and religion, he would not talk to. As a matter of fact, we are controlled today by men who do not exist. We are controlled today by phenomena that never did exist. We are controlled by ghosts and dead men, and in the grasp of death is a scepter that controls the living present. I propose that we shall govern ourselves. I propose that we shall let the past go, and let the dead past bury the dead past. I believe the American people have brains enough, and nerve enough, and courage enough to control and govern themselves without any assistance from dust or ghosts. That is my doctrine, and I am going to do what I can while I live to increase that feeling of independence and manhood in the American people. We can control ourselves. I believe in the gospel of this world. I believe in happiness right here. I do not believe in drinking skim milk all my life, with the expectation of butter beyond the clouds. I believe in the gospel, I say, in this world. This is a mighty good world. There are plenty of good people in this world. There is lots of happiness in this world, and I say, let us, in every way we can, increase it. I envy every man who is content with his lot, whether he is poor or whether he is rich. I tell you, the man that tries to make somebody else happy, and who owns his own soul, nobody having a mortgage or deed of trust upon his manhood or liberty, this world is a pretty good world for such a man. I do not care. I am going to say my say, whether I make money or grow poor, no matter whether I get high office or walk along the dusty highway of the common. I am going to say my say, and I had rather be a farmer and live on 40 acres of land, live in a log cabin that I built myself, and have a little grassy path going down to the spring, so that I can go there and hear the waters gurgling, and know that it is coming out from the lips of the earth like a poem whispering to the white pebbles. I would rather live there and have some hollyhocks at the corner of the house, and the larks singing and swinging in the trees, and some lattice over the window so that the sunlight can fall checkered on the babe in the cradle. I had rather live there and have the freedom of my own brain. I had rather do that than live in a palace of gold and crawl, a slimy hypocrite, through this world. Superstition has done enough harm already. Every religion, nearly, suspects everything that is pleasant, everything that is joyous, and they always have a notion that God feels best when we feel worst. They have chained the Andromeda of joy to the cold rock of ignorance and fear, there to be devoured by the dragon of superstition. Church and state are two vultures that have fed upon the heart of chained Prometheus. I say, let the human race have a chance. Let every man think for himself and express that thought. There is no wrath in the serene heavens. There is no scowl in the blue of the sky. Upon the throne of the universe tyranny does not sit as king. The speaker here took from his pocket a pair of spectacles and adjusted them, saying, "I am sorry to admit it, I have got to come to it. I hate to put on a pair of spectacles, but the other day, as I was putting them on, a thought struck me. I see progress in this. To progress is to overcome the obstacles of nature, and in order to overcome this obstacle of the loss of sight, man invented spectacles. Spectacles led men to the telescope, with which he read all the starry heavens, and had it not been for the failure of sight, we wouldn't have seen a millionth part that we have. In the first place, we owe nothing but truth to the dead. I am going to tell the truth about them. There are 3 theories by which men account for all phenomena, for everything that happens. First, the supernatural. In the olden time, everything that happened, some deity produced, some spirit, some devil, some hobgoblin, some dryad, some fairy, some spook, something except nature. First, then, the supernatural, and a barbarian looking at the wide, mysterious sea, wandering through the depths of the forest, encountering the wild beasts, troubled by strange dreams, accounted for everything by the actions of spirits, good and bad. Second, the supernatural and natural. There is where the religious world is today, a mingling of the supernatural and natural. The idea being that God created the world and imposed upon men certain laws, and then let them run, and if they ever got into any trouble, then he would do a miracle, and accomplish any good that he desired to do. Third, and that is the grand theory, the natural. Between these theories there has been from the dawn of civilization a conflict. In this great war nearly all the soldiers have been in the ranks of the supernatural. The believers in the supernatural insist that matter is controlled and directed entirely by powers from without. The naturalists maintain that nature acts from within, that nature is not acted upon, that the universe is all there is, that nature with infinite arms embraces everything that exists, and that the supposed powers beyond the limits of the materially real are simply ghosts. You say, this is materialism. This is the doctrine of matter. What is matter? I take a handful of earth in my hands, and into that dust I put seeds, and arrows from the eternal quiver of the sun smite it, and the seeds grow and bud and blossom, and fill the air with perfume in my sight. Do you understand that? Do you understand how this dust, and these seeds, and that light, and this moisture produced that bud, and that flower, and that perfume? Do you understand that any better than you do the production of thought? Do you understand that any better than you do a dream? Do you understand that any better than you do the thoughts of love that you see in the eyes of the one you adore? Can you explain it? Can you tell what matter is? Have you the slightest conception? Yet you talk about matter as though you were acquainted with its origin, as though you had compelled with clenched hands the very rocks to give up the secret of existence. Do you know what force is? Can you account for molecular action? Are you familiar with chemistry? Can you account for the loves and the hatreds of the atoms? Is there not something in matter that forever excludes you? Can you tell what matter really is? Before you cry materialism, you had better find what matter is. Can you tell of anything without a material basis? Is it possible to imagine the annihilation of a single atom? Is it possible for you to conceive of the creation of a single atom? Can you have a thought that is not suggested to you by what you call matter? Did any man or woman or child ever have a solitary thought, dream, or conception that was not suggested to them by something they had seen in nature? Can you conceive of anything the different parts of which have been suggested to you by nature? Can you conceive of an animal with the hoofs of a bison, with the pouch of a kangaroo, with the head of a buffalo, with the tail of a lion, with the scales of a fish, with the wings of a bird, and yet every part of this impossible monster has been suggested to you by nature? You say time, therefore you can think eternity. You say pain, therefore you can think hell. You say strength, therefore you can think omnipotence. You say wisdom, therefore you can think infinite wisdom. Everything you see, everything you can dream of or think of, has been suggested to you by your surroundings, by nature. Man cannot rise above nature. Below nature man cannot fall. Imagine, if you please, the creation of a single atom. Can any one here imagine the creation out of nothing of one atom? Can anyone here imagine the destruction of one atom? Can you imagine an atom being changed to nothing? Can you imagine nothing being changed to an atom? There is not a solitary person here with an imagination strong enough to think either of the creation of an atom or the annihilation of an atom. Matter and the universe are the same yesterday, today, and forever. There is just as much matter in the universe today as there ever was, and as there ever will be. There is just as much force and just as much energy as there ever was or ever will be, but it is continually taking different shapes and forms. One day it is a man, another day it is animal, another day it is earth, another day it is metal, another day it is gas. It gains nothing and it loses nothing. Our fathers denounced materialism and accounted for all phenomena how? By the caprice of gods and devils. For thousands of years it was believed that ghosts, good ghosts, bad ghosts, benevolent and malevolent, in some mysterious way produced all phenomena. That disease and health, happiness and misery, fortune and misfortune, peace and war, life and death, success and failure, were but arrows shot by those ghosts or shadowy phantoms to reward or punish mankind; that they were displeased or pleased by our actions; that they blessed the earth with harvest or cursed it with famine; that they fed or starved the children of men; that they crowned or uncrowned kings; that they controlled war; that they gave prosperous voyages, allowing the brave mariner to meet his wife and children inside the harbor bar, or strewed the sad shore with wrecks of ships and the bodies of men. Formerly these ghosts were believed to be almost innumerable. Earth, air and water were filled with these phantoms. But in modern times they have greatly decreased in number, because the second proposition that I stated, the supernatural and the natural, has generally been adopted. But the remaining ghosts are supposed to perform the same functions as of yore. Let me say right here that the object of every religion ever made by man has been to get on the good side of supposed powers, has been to petition the gods to stop the earthquakes, to stop famine, to stop pestilence. It has always been something that man should do to prevent being punished by the powers of the air, or to get from them some favors. It has always been believed that these ghosts could in some way be appeased, that they could be bettered by sacrifices, by prayer, by fasting, by the building of temples and cathedrals, by shedding the blood of men and beasts, by forms, by ceremonies, by kneelings, by prostrations and flagellations, by living alone in the wild desert, by the practice of celibacy, by inventing instruments of torture, by destroying men, women and children, by covering the earth with dungeons, by burning unbelievers, and by putting chains upon the thoughts and manacles upon the lips of men, by believing things without evidence, by believing things against evidence, by disbelieving and denying demonstrations, by despising facts, by hating reason, by discouraging investigation, by making an idiot of yourself. All these have been done to appease the winged monsters of the air. In the history of our poor world, no horror has been omitted, no infamy has been left undone by believers in ghosts, and all the shadows were born of cowardice and malignity. They were painted by the pencil of fear upon the canvas of ignorance, by that artist called superstition. From these ghosts our fathers received their information. These ghosts were the schoolmasters of our ancestors. They were the scientists, the philosophers, the geologists, the legislators, the astronomers, the physicians, the metaphysicians, and historians of the past. Let me give you my definition of metaphysics, that is to say, the science of the unknown, the science of guessing. Metaphysics is where two fools get together, and each one admits that neither one can prove, and both say, "Hence we infer." That is the science of metaphysics. For this, these ghosts were supposed to have the only experience and real knowledge. They inspired men to write books, and the books were sacred. If facts were found to be inconsistent with these books, so much the worse for the facts, and especially for the discoverers of these facts. It was then and still is believed that these sacred books are the basis of the idea of immortality. To give up the idea that these books were inspired is to renounce the idea of immortal life. I deny it. Men existed before books, and all the books that were ever written were written in my judgment by men. And the idea of immortality was not born of a book, but was born of the man who wrote the book. The idea of immortality, like the great sea, has ebbed and flowed in the human heart, beating its countless waves of hope and joy against the shores of time, and was not born of any book, nor of any religion, nor of any creed. It was born of human affection, and it will continue to ebb and flow beneath the clouds and mists of doubt and darkness as long as love kisses the lips of death. It is the rainbow of hope shining upon the tears of grief. We love, therefore we wish to live, and the foundation of the idea of immortality is human affection and human love, and I have 1,000 times more confidence in the affections of the human heart, in the deep and splendid feelings of the human soul, than I have in any book that ever was or ever can be written by mortal man. From the books written by those ghosts we have at least ascertained that they knew nothing whatever of the world in which we live. Did they know anything about the other? Upon every point where contradiction is possible, the ghosts have been contradicted. By these ghosts, by these citizens of the air, by this aristocracy of the clouds, the affairs of government were administered. All authority to govern came from them. The emperors, kings, and potentates, every one of them, had the divine petroleum poured upon his head, the kerosene of authority. The emperors, kings, and potentates had communications from the phantoms. Man was not considered as the source of power. To rebel against the king was to rebel against the ghosts, and nothing less than the blood of the offenders could appease the invisible phantoms. And by the authority of the ghosts man was crushed and slain and plundered. Many toiled wearily in the sun and storm that a few favorites of the ghosts might live in idleness, and many lived in huts and caves and dens that the few might dwell in palaces, and many clothed themselves with rags that a few might robe themselves in purple and gold, and many crept and cringed and crawled that a few might tread upon their necks with feet of iron. From the ghosts men received not only authority but information. They told us the form of the earth. They informed us that eclipses were caused by the sins of man, especially the failure to pay tithes; that the universe was made in 6 days; that gazing at the sky with a telescope was dangerous; that trying to be wise beyond what they had written was born of a rebellious and irreverent spirit. They told us there was no virtue like belief, no crime like doubt; that investigation was simply impudence, and the punishment therefor violent torment. They not only told us all about this world, but about 2 others, and if their statements about the other 2 are as true as they were about this, no one can estimate the value of their information. For countless ages the world was governed by ghosts, and they spared no pains to change the eagle of the human intellect into a bat of darkness. To accomplish this infamous purpose, to drive the love of truth from the human heart, to prevent the advancement of mankind, to shut out from the world every ray of intellectual light, to pollute every mind with superstition, the power of kings, the cunning and cruelty of priests, and the wealth of nations were used. In order to show you the information we got from the ghosts, and the condition of the world when the ghosts were the kings, let me call your attention to this. During these years of persecution, ignorance, superstition, and slavery, nearly all the people, the kings, lawyers, and doctors, learned and unlearned, believed in that frightful production of ignorance, of fear and faith, called witchcraft. Witchcraft today is religion carried out. They believed that man was the sport and prey of devils, that the very air was thick with these enemies of man, and with few exceptions this hideous belief was universal. Under these conditions progress was almost impossible. Fear paralyzed the brain. Progress is born of courage. Fear believes, courage doubts. Fear falls upon the earth and prays. Courage stands erect and thinks. Fear retreats. Courage advances. Fear is barbarism. Courage is civilization. Fear believes in witchcraft. Courage in science and in eternal law. The facts upon which this terrible belief rested were proved over and over again in nearly every court in Europe. Thousands confessed themselves guilty, admitted they had sold themselves to the devil. They gave the particulars of the sale, told what they said and what the devil replied. They confessed themselves guilty when they knew that confession was death, knew that their property would be confiscated and their children left to beg their bread. This is one of the miracles of history, one of the strangest contradictions of the human mind. Without doubt, they really believed themselves guilty. In the first place, they believed in witchcraft as a fact, and when charged with it, they became insane. They had read the account of the witch of Endor calling up the dead body of Samuel. He is an old man. He has his mantle on. They had read the account of Saul stooping to the earth and conversing with the spirit that had been called from the region of space by a witch. They had read a command from the Almighty, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." And they believed the world was full of witches, or else the Almighty would not have made a law against them. They believed in witchcraft, and when they were charged with it, they probably became insane, and in their insanity they confessed their guilt. They found themselves abhorred and deserted, charged with a crime they could not disprove. Like a man in quicksand, every effort only sunk them deeper. Caught in this frightful web, at the mercy of the devotees of superstition, hope fled, and nothing remained but the insanity of confession. The whole world appeared insane. In the time of James I, a man was burned for causing a storm at sea, with the intention of drowning one of the royal family. but I do not think it would have been much of a crime if he had been really guilty. How could he disprove it? How could he show that he did not cause a storm at sea? All storms were at that time supposed to be inspired by the devil. The people believed that all storms were caused by him or by persons whom he assisted. I implore you to remember that the men who believed these things wrote our creeds and our confessions of faith, and it is by their dust that I am asked to kneel and pay implicit homage instead of investigating. And I implore you to recollect that they wrote our creeds. A woman was tried and convicted before Sir Matthew Hale, one of the greatest judges and lawyers of England, for having caused children to vomit crooked pins. Think of that! The learned judge charged the intelligent jury that there was no doubt as to the existence of witches, that it was established by all history and expressly taught by the Bible. The woman was hung and her body was burned. Sir Thomas More declared that to give up witchcraft was to throw away the sacred scriptures. John Wesley, too, was a firm believer in ghosts, and insisted upon their existence after all laws upon the subject had been repealed in England. And I beg of you to remember that John Wesley was the founder of the Methodist Church. In New England, a woman was charged with being a witch, and with having changed herself into a fox. While in that condition she was attacked and bitten by some dogs, and a committee of 3 men was ordered by the court to examine this woman. They removed her clothing and searched for what they were pleased to call witch spots. That is to say, spots into which a needle could be thrust without giving pain. They reported to the court that such spots were found. She denied that she had ever changed herself into a fox. On the report of the committee, she was found guilty, and she was actually executed by our Puritan fathers, the gentlemen who braved the danger of the deep for the sake of worshiping God and persecuting their fellow men. I belong to their blood, and the best thing I can say about them, and that which rises like a white shaft to their eternal honor, is that they were in favor of education. A man was attacked by a wolf. He defended himself and succeeded in cutting off one of the animal's paws, and the wolf ran away. He put it in his pocket and carried it home. There he found his wife with one of her hands gone, and he took that paw from his pocket and put it on her arm, and it assumed the appearance of a human hand. And he charged his wife with being a witch. She was tried. She confessed her guilt, and she was hung, and her body was burned. My, is it possible? Did not somebody say something against such an infamous proceeding? Yes, they did. There was a young men's association who invited a man to come and give his ideas upon the subject. He denounced it. He said it was outrageous, that it was nonsensical, that it was infamous. And the moment he went away, the young men met and passed a resolution that he had deceived them, and the clergy at that time protested and said, of course, let the man think, if you call that kind of stuff thinking. But there was one man belonging to this association who had the courage to stand by the truth. Whether he believed in what the speaker said or not, he had that manliness, and I take this opportunity to thank, from the bottom of my heart, a man. I have no idea he agrees with me except in this: whatever you do, do it like a man, and be honest about it. People were burned for causing frost in summer, for destroying crops with hail, for causing storms, for making cows go dry, for souring beer, for putting the devil in emptyings so that they would not rise. The life of no one was secure. To be charged was to be convicted. Every man was at the mercy of every other. This infamous belief was so firmly seated in the minds of the people that to express a doubt as to its existence was to be suspected yourself. They believed that animals were often taken possession of by devils, and they believed that the killing of the animal would destroy the devil. They absolutely tried, convicted, and executed dumb beasts. At Vale, in 1470, a rooster was tried upon the charge of having laid an egg, and the clergy said they had no doubt of it. Rooster eggs were used only in making witch ointment. This everybody knew. The rooster was convicted, and with all due solemnity he was burned in the public square. So a hog and 6 pigs died for having killed and partially eaten a child. The hog was convicted, but the pigs, on account of their extreme youth, were acquitted. As late as 1740, a cow, charged with being possessed of a devil, was tried and was convicted. They used to exorcise rats, snakes, and vermin. They used to go through the alleys and streets and fields and warn them to leave within a certain number of days, and if they did not leave, they threatened them with certain pains and penalties which they proceeded to recount. But let us be careful how we laugh about those things. Let us not pride ourselves too much on the progress of our age. We must not forget that some of our people are yet in the same intelligent business. Only a little while ago the governor of Minnesota appointed a day of fasting and prayer to see if the Lord could not be induced to kill the grasshoppers or send them into some other state. About the close of the 15th century was the excitement in regard to witchcraft, and Pope Innocent VIII issued a bull directing the inquisitors to be vigilant in searching out and punishing all guilty of this crime. Forms for the crime were regularly issued. For 250 years the church was busy in punishing the impossible crime of witchcraft by burning, hanging, and torturing men, women, and little children. Protestants were as active as Catholics, and in Geneva 500 witches were burned at the stake in 3 months, and 1,000 were executed in 1 year in the diocese of Kourou. At least 100,000 victims suffered in Germany, the last execution being in Galesburg and taking place in 1794, and the last in Switzerland 1780. In England, statutes were passed from Henry VI to James I, defining the crime and punishment, and the last act passed in the British Parliament was when Lord Bacon was a member of the House. In 1716, Mrs. Hicks and daughter, 9 years of age, were hung for selling their souls to the devil and raising a storm at sea by pulling off their stockings and making a lather of soap. In England it has been estimated that at least 30,000 were hung or burned. The last victim executed in Scotland was 1722. She was an innocent old woman who had so little idea of her condition that she rejoiced at the sight of the fire destined to consume her to ashes. She had a daughter lame in her hands, a circumstance accounted for from the fact that the witch had been used to transfer her daughter into a pony and get her shod by the devil. Intelligent ancestors. In 1692, 19 persons were executed in Salem, Massachusetts, for the crime of witchcraft. It was thought in those days that men and women made contracts with the devil, and those contracts were confirmed at a meeting of witches and ghosts, over which the devil presided. These contracts in some cases were for a few years, others for life. General assemblages of witches were held once a year. To these they rode from great distances on brooms and dogs, and there they did homage to the Prince of Hell and offered him sacrifices. In 1836 the populace of Holland plunged into the sea a woman reputed to be a sorceress, and as the miserable woman persisted in rising to the surface, she was pronounced guilty and was beaten to death. It was believed that the devil could transform people into any shape he pleased, and whoever denounced this idea was denounced as an infidel. that the believers in witchcraft appealed to the devil, that with the devil were associated innumerable spirits who ranged over the world endeavoring to torment mankind, that these spirits possessed a power and wisdom transcending the limits of human faculties. They believed the devil could carry persons hundreds of miles in a few seconds. They believed this because they knew that Christ had been carried by the devil in the same manner into a high mountain and placed upon a pinnacle. According to their account, the prince of the air had absolutely taken the God of this infinite universe, the creator of all its shining, wheeling stars. He had been absolutely taken by the devil to a pinnacle of the temple, and there had been tempted by the devil to cast himself to the earth. Take from the church itself the threat and fear of hell, and it becomes an extinct volcano. With the doctrine of hell taken from the church, that is the end of the fall of man. That is the end of the scheme of atonement. Take from them the idea of an eternal place of torment, and the church is thrown back simply upon facts. And Dean Stanley, the leading ecclesiastic of Great Britain, only the other day in Winchester Abbey said science will be the only theology of the future. Morality is the only religion of the years to come. Notwithstanding all the infamous things laid to the charge of the church, we are told that the civilization of today is the child of what we are pleased to call superstition. Let me call your attention to what they received from their fears of these ghosts. Let me give you an outline of the sciences as taught by these philosophers. There is one thing that a man is interested in, if he is in anything, and that is in the science of medicine. A doctor is, so to speak, in partnership with nature. He is a preserver, if he is worthy of the name. And now I want to show what they have gotten from these ghosts upon the science of medicine. According to them, all of the diseases were produced as a punishment by the good ghosts, or out of pure malignity by the bad ones. There were, properly speaking, no diseases. The sick were simply possessed by ghosts. The science of medicine consisted in knowing how to persuade these ghosts to vacate the premises, and for thousands of years all diseases were treated with incantations, hideous noises, with the beating of drums and gongs. Everything was done to make the position of a ghost as unpleasant as possible, and they generally succeeded in making things so disagreeable that if the ghost did not leave, the patient died. These ghosts were supposed to be different in rank, power, and dignity. Now, then, a man pretended to have won the favor of some powerful ghost, who gave him power over the little ones. Such a man became a very great physician. It was found that a certain kind of smoke was exceedingly offensive to the nostrils of your ordinary ghost. With this smoke the sick room would be filled until the ghost vanished, or the patient died. It was also believed that certain words, when properly pronounced, were the most effective weapons, for it was for a long time supposed that Latin words were the best. I suppose because Latin was a dead language. For thousands of years medicine consisted in driving the devils out of men. In some instances bargains and promises were made with the ghosts. One case is given where a multitude of devils traded a man off for a herd of swine. In this transaction the devils were the losers, the swine having immediately drowned themselves in the sea. This idea of disease appears to have been almost universal, and is not yet extinct. The contortions of the epileptic, the strange twitching of those afflicted with cholera, were all seized as proof that the bodies of men were filled with vile and malignant spirits. Whoever endeavored to account for these things by natural causes, whoever endeavored to cure disease by natural means, was denounced as an infidel. To explain anything was a crime. It was to the interest of the sacerdotal class that all things should be accounted for by the will and power of God and the devil. The moment it is admitted that all phenomena are within the domain of the natural, and that all the prayers in the world cannot change one solitary fact, the necessity for the priest disappears. Religion breathes the idea of miracles. Take from the minds of men the idea of the supernatural, and superstition ceases to exist. For this reason the church has always despised the man who explains the wonderful. The moment that it began to be apparent that prayer could do nothing for the body, the priest shifted his ground and began praying for the soul. After the devil was substantially abandoned in the practice of medicine, and when it was admitted that God had nothing to do with ordinary coughs and colds, it was still believed that all the diseases were sent by him as punishment for the people. It was thought to be a kind of blasphemy to even stay the ravages of pestilence. Formerly, when a pestilence fell upon a people, the arguments of the priest were boundless. He told the people that they had refused to pay their tithes, and they had doubted some of the doctrines of the church; that in their hearts they had contempt for some of the priests of the Lord, and God was now taking his revenge; and the people, for the most part, believed this issue of falsehood, and hastened to fall upon their knees and to pour out their wealth upon the altars of hypocrisy. The church never wanted disease to be absolutely under the control of man. Timothy Dwight, president of Yale College, preached a sermon against vaccination. His idea was that if God had decreed that through all eternity certain men should die of smallpox, it was a frightful sin to endeavor to prevent it; that plagues and pestilence were instruments in the hands of God with which to gain the love and worship of mankind. To find the cure for the disease was to take the punishment from the church. No one tries to cure the ague with prayer, because quinine has been found to be altogether more reliable. Just as soon as a specific is found for a disease, that disease is left out of the list of prayer. The number of diseases with which God from time to time afflicts mankind is continually decreasing, because the number of diseases that man can cure is continually increasing. In a few years all diseases will be under the control of man. The science of medicine has but one enemy: superstition. Man was afraid to save his body for fear he would lose his soul. Is it any wonder that the people in those days believed in and taught the infamous doctrine of eternal punishment that makes God a heartless monster and man a slimy hypocrite and slave? The ghosts were also historians, and wrote the grossest absurdities. They wrote as though they had been eye witnesses of every occurrence. They told all the past, they predicted all the future, with an impudence that amounted to sublimity. They said that the Tartars originally came from hell, and that they were called Tartars because that was one of the names of hell. These gentlemen accounted for the red on the breasts of robins from the fact that those birds used to carry water to the unhappy infants in hell. Other eminent historians say that Nero was in the habit of vomiting frogs. When I read that, I said some of the croakers of the present day would be better for such a vomit. Others say that the walls of a city fell down in answer to prayer. They tell us that King Arthur was not born like other mortals, that he had great luck in killing giants, that one of the giants that he killed wore clothes woven from the beards of kings that he had slain, and, to cap the climax, the authors of this history were rewarded for having written the only reliable history of their country. These are the men from whom we get our creeds and our confessions of faith. In all the histories of those days there is hardly a truth. Facts were not considered of any importance. They wrote, and the people believed that the tracks of Pharaoh's chariot were still visible upon the sands of the Red Sea, and that they had been miraculously preserved as perpetual witnesses of the miracles that had been performed, And they said to any man who denied it, "Go there, and you will find the tracks still upon the sand." They accounted for everything as the work of good and evil spirits. With cause and effect they had nothing to do. Facts were in no way related to each other. God, governed by infinite caprice, filled the world with miracles and disconnected events, and from his quiver came the arrows of pestilence and death. The moment the idea is abandoned that everything in this universe is natural, that all conception of history becomes impossible, that the ghost of the present is not the child of the past, the present is not the mother of the future. In the domain of superstition all is accident and caprice, and do not, I pray you, forget that the writers of our creeds and confessions of faith believed this to be a world of chance. Nothing happens by accident. Nothing happens by chance. In the wide universe everything is necessarily produced. Every effect has behind it a cause. Every effect is in its turn a cause, and there is in the wide domain of the infinite not room enough for a miracle. When I say this, I mean this is my idea. I may be wrong, but that is my idea. It was believed by our intelligent ancestors that all law derived its greatness and force from the fact that it had been communicated to man by ghosts. Of course, it is not pretended that the ghosts told everybody the law, but they told it to a few, and the few told it to the people, and the people, as a rule, paid them exceedingly well for the trouble. It was a long time before the people commenced making laws for themselves, and, strange as it may appear, most of their laws are vastly superior to the ghost article. Through the web and woof of human legislation gradually began to run and shine and glitter the golden thread of justice. During these years of darkness it was believed that, rather than see an act of injustice done, rather than see the guilty triumph, some ghost would interfere, and I do wish from the bottom of my heart that that was the truth. There never was forced upon my heart a more frightful conviction than this: the right does not always prevail. There never was forced upon my mind a more cruel conclusion than this: innocence is not always a sufficient shield. I wish it was. I wish, too, that man suffered nothing but that which he brings upon himself. And yet I find that in 9 districts in India, between the 1st day of last January and the 1st day of June, 2,800,000 people starved to death, and that little children, with their lips upon the breasts of famine, died, wasted away. And why? Simply because a little while before the wind did not veer the 100th part of a degree and send clouds over the country, freighted with rain, freighted with love and joy. But if that wind had just turned that way, there would have been happy men, women, and children, all clad in the garments of health. I wish that I could know in my heart that there was some power that would see to it that men and women got exact justice somewhere. I do wish that I knew the right would prevail, that innocence was an infinite shield. During these years it was believed that rather than see an act of injustice done, some ghost would interfere. This belief, as a rule, gave great satisfaction to the victorious party, and as the other man was dead, no complaint was ever made by him. This doctrine was a sanctification of brute force and chance. Prisoners were made to grasp hot irons, and if it burned them, their guilt was established. Others were tied hands and feet and cast into the sea, and if they sank, the verdict of guilt was unanimous. If they did not sink, then they said water is such a pure element that it refuses to take a guilty person, and consequently he is a witch or wizard. Why, in England, persons accused of crime could appeal to the cross and to a piece of sacramental bread. If he could swallow this without choking, he was acquitted. And this practice was continued until the time of King Edward, who was choked to death, after which it was discontinued. This is the end of part 1 of Ingersoll's lecture on ghosts, part of the collected lectures of Colonel Robert G. Ingersoll. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Read for you by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina, during April 2007. Saul's Lecture on Ghosts, Part 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lectures of Colonel R. G. Ingersoll, Lecture Number 2, Ghosts. Ghosts and their followers always took delight in torturing with unusual pain any infraction of their laws, and generally death was the penalty. Sometimes, when a man committed only murder, he was permitted to flee to a place of refuge, murder being only a crime against man. But for saying certain words, or denying certain doctrines, or for worshiping wrong ghosts, or for failing to pray to the right one, or for laughing at a priest, or for saying that wine was not blood, or bread was not flesh, or for failing to regard ram's horns as artillery, or for saying that a raven, as a rule, was a poor landlord, death, produced by all the ways that ingenuity or hatred could devise, was the penalty suffered by these men. I tell you tonight, law is a growth. Law is a science. Right and wrong exist in the nature of things. Things are not right because they are commanded. They are not wrong because they are prohibited. They are prohibited because we believe them wrong. They are commended because we believe them right. There are real crimes enough without creating artificial ones. All progress in legislation for 1,000 years has consisted in repealing the laws of the ghosts. The idea of right and wrong is born of man's capacity to enjoy and suffer. If man could not suffer, if he could not inflict injury upon his brother, if he could neither feel nor inflict punishment, the idea of law, the idea of right, the idea of wrong, never could have entered into his brain. If man could not suffer, if he could not inflict suffering, the word conscience never would have passed the lips of man. There is one good, happiness. There is one sin, selfishness. All laws should be for the preservation of the one and the destruction of the other. Under the regime of the ghosts, the laws were not understood to exist in the nature of things. They were supposed to be irresponsible commands, and these commands were not supposed to rest upon reason. They were simply the product of arbitrary will. These penalties for the violations of those laws were as cruel as the penalties were absurd. There were over 200 offenses for which man was punished with death. Think of it! And these laws are said to have come from a most merciful God. And yet we have become civilized to that degree in this country that in the state of New York there is only one crime punishable with death. Think of it. Did I not tell you that we were now civilizing our gods? The tendency of those horrible laws, the tendency of those frightful penalties, was to blot the idea of justice from the human soul. Now I want to show you how perfectly every department of human knowledge, or rather of ignorance, was saturated with superstition. I will for a moment refer to the science of language. It was thought by our fathers that Hebrew was the original language, that it was taught to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden by the Almighty Himself. Every fact inconsistent with that idea was thrown away. According to the ghosts, the trouble at the Tower of Babel accounted for the fact that all the people did not speak the Hebrew language. The Babel question settled all questions in the science of language. After a time, so many facts were found to be so inconsistent with the Hebrew idea that it began to fall into disrepute, and other languages began to be used. Andrew Kent published a work on the science of language, in which he stated that God spoke to Adam, and Adam answered in Hebrew, and that the serpent probably spoke to Eve in French. In 1580, another celebrated work was published at Antwerp, in which the whole matter was put at rest, showing beyond a doubt that the language spoken in Paradise was neither more nor less than plain Holland Dutch. Another celebrated writer, a contemporary of Sir Isaac Newton, discouraged the idea that all languages could be traced to one. He maintained that language was of natural growth, that we speak as naturally as we grow, we talk as naturally as sings a bird, or as blooms and blossoms a flower. Experience teaches us that this be so. Words are continually dying and continually being born. Words are the garments of thought. Through the lapse of time, some were as rude as the skins of wild beasts, and others pleasing and cultured like silk and gold. Words have been born of hatred and revenge, of love and self-sacrifice and fear, of agony and joy. The stars have fashioned them, and in them mingled the darkness and the dawn. Every word that we get from the past is, so to speak, a mummy robed in the linen of the grave. They are the crystallizations of human history, of all that man enjoyed, of all that man has suffered, his victories and defeats, all that he has lost and won. Words are the shadows of all that has been. They are the mirrors of all that is. The ghosts also enlightened our fathers in astronomy and geology. According to them, the world was made out of nothing, and a little more nothing having been taken than was used in the construction of the world, the stars were made out of the scraps that were left over. Cosmos, in the 6th century, taught that the stars were impelled by angels who carried them upon their shoulders, rolled them in front of them, or drew them after. He also taught that each angel who pushed a star took great pains to observe what the other angels were doing, so that the relative distances between the stars might always remain the same. He stated that this world was a vast body of water, with a strip of land on the outside; that Adam and Eve lived on the outer strip; that their descendants were drowned on the outer strip, all except Noah and his family. He accounted for night and day by saying that on the outer strip of land was a mountain, around which the sun revolved, producing darkness when it was hidden from sight, and daylight when it emerged. He also declared the earth to be flat. This he proved by many passages from the Bible. Among other reasons for believing the earth to be flat, he referred to a passage in the New Testament which says that Christ shall come again in glory and power, and every eye shall see him, and said, now if the world is round, how are the people on the other side going to see Christ when he comes? That settled the question, and the church not only endorsed this book, but declared that whoever believed either less or more was a heretic, and would be dealt with as such. In those blessed days, ignorance was a king, and science was an outcast. The church knew that the moment the earth ceased to be the center of the universe, and became a mere speck in the starry sphere of existence, every religion would become a thing of the past. In the name and by the authority of the ghosts, men enslaved their fellow men. They trampled upon the rights of women and children. In the name and by the authority of ghosts, they bought and sold each other. They filled heaven with tyrants and the earth with slaves. They filled the present with intolerance and the future with horror. In the name and by the authority of the ghosts, they declared superstition to be the real religion. In the name and by the authority of the ghosts, they imprisoned the human mind. They polluted the conscience. They subverted justice, and they sainted hypocrisy. I have endeavored in some degree to show you what has been and always will be when men are governed by superstition. When they destroy the sublime standard of reason, when they take the words of others and do not investigate them themselves, Even the great men of those days appear nearly as weak as the most ignorant. One of the greatest men of the world, an astronomer second to none, discoverer of the three great laws that explain the solar system, was an astrologer, and believed that he could predict the career of a man by finding what star was in the ascendant at his birth. He believed in what is called the music of the spheres, and he ascribed the qualities of the music alto, bass, tenor, and treble to certain of the planets. Another man kept an idiot whose words he put down and then put them together in such a manner as to make promises, and waited patiently to see that they were fulfilled. Luther believed he had actually seen the devil, and discussed points of theology with him. The human mind was enchained. Every idea almost was a mystery. Facts were looked upon as worthless. Only the wonderful was worth preserving. Devils were thought to be the most industrious beings in the universe, and with these imps every occurrence of an unusual character was connected. There was no order, certainty. Everything depended upon ghosts and phantoms, and man for the most part considered himself at the mercy of malevolent spirits. He protected himself as best he could with holy water, and with tapers and wafers and cathedrals. He made noises to frighten the ghosts, and music to charm them. He fasted when he was hungry, and he feasted when he was not. He believed everything unreasonable. He humbled himself. He crawled in the dust. He shut the doors and windows, and excluded every ray of light from his soul. And he delayed not a day to repair the walls of his own prison. And from the garden of the human heart they plucked and trampled into the bloody dust the flowers and blossoms. They denounced man as totally depraved. They made reason blasphemy. They made pity a crime. Nothing so delighted them as painting the torments and tortures of the damned. Over the worm that never dies they grew poetic. According to them, the cries ascending from hell were the perfume of heaven. They divided the world into saints and sinners, and all the saints were going to heaven, and all the sinners yonder. Now, then, you stand in the presence of a great disaster. A house is on fire, and there is seen at a window the frightened face of a woman with a babe in her arms, appealing for help. Humanity cries out, will someone go to the rescue? They do not ask for a Methodist, a Baptist, or a Catholic. They ask for a man. All at once there starts from the crowd one that nobody ever suspected of being a saint. One may be with a bad reputation, but he goes up the ladder and is lost in the smoke and flame, and a moment after he emerges and the great circles of flame hiss around him, in a moment more he has reached the window. In another moment, with the woman and child in his arms, he reaches the ground and gives his fainting burden to the bystanders, and the people all stand hushed for a moment, as they always do at such times. And then the air is rent with acclamations. Tell me that that man is going to be sent to hell, to eternal flames, who is willing to risk his life rather than a woman and child should suffer from the fire one moment. I despise that doctrine of hell. Any man that believes in eternal hell is afflicted with at least two diseases: petrifaction of the heart and petrifaction of the brain. I have seen upon the field of battle a boy 16 years of age struck by a fragment of a shell. I have seen him fall. I have seen him die with a curse upon his lips and the face of his mother in his heart. Tell me that his soul will be hurled from the field of battle where he lost his life that his country might live, where he lost his life for the liberties of man. Tell me that he will be hurled from that field to eternal torment. I pronounce it an infamous lie, and yet, according to these gentlemen, that is to be the fate of nearly all the splendid fellows in this world. I had in my possession a little while ago a piece of fresco that used to adorn a church at Stratford-on-Avon, the place where Shakespeare lived. and there was a picture representing the morning of the resurrection, and people were getting out of their graves, and devils were grabbing them by their heels, and there was an immense monster with jaws open so wide that a man could walk down its throat, and the flames were issuing therefrom, and there were devils driving people in droves down the throat of this monster. And there was an immense kettle in which they had put these men, and the fire was being stirred under it, and hot pitch was being poured on top, and little devils were setting it on fire, and then on the walls there were hundreds hung up by their tongues to hooks and nails. And then the saved, there were some 5 or 6 saved, upon the horizon, and they had a most self-satisfied grin of, "I told you so." At the risk of being tiresome, I have said that I have to show the direction of the human mind in slavery, the effects of a widespread ignorance, and the result of fear. I want to convince you that every form of slavery, physical or mental, is a viper that will finally fill with poison the breast of any man alive. I want to show you that there should be republicanism in the domain of thought as well as in civil government. The first step towards progress is for man to cease to be the slave of the creatures of his creation. Men found at last that the event is more valuable than the prophecy, especially if it never comes to pass. They found that diseases were not produced by spirits, that they could not be cured by frightening them away. They found that death was as natural as life. They began to study the anatomy and chemistry of the human body, and they found that all was natural, and the conjurer and the sorcerer were dismissed, and the physician and surgeon were employed. They learned that being born under a star or planet had nothing to do with their luck. The astrologer was discharged, and the astronomer took his place. They found that the world had swept through the constellation for millions of ages. They found that diseases were produced as easily as grass, and were not sent as punishment on men for failing to believe a creed. They found that man, through intelligence, could take advantage of the affairs of its nature, that he could make the waves, the winds, the flames, and the lightnings slaves at his bidding to administer to his wants. They found the ghosts knew nothing of benefit to man, that they were entirely ignorant of history, that they were bad doctors and worse surgeons, that they knew nothing of the law and less of justice, that they were poor politicians, that they were tyrants, and that they were without brains and utterly destitute of hearts. The condition of this world during the Dark Ages shows exactly the result of enslaving the souls of men. In those days there was no liberty. Liberty was despised, and the laborer was considered but little above the beast. Ignorance, like a vast cowl, covered the brain of the world. Superstition ran riot, and credulity sat upon the throne of the soul. Murder and hypocrisy were the companions of man, and industry was a slave. Every country maintained that it was no robbery to take the property of Mohammedans by force, and no murder to kill the owner. Lord Bacon was the first man who maintained that a Christian country was bound to keep its plighted faith with a Mohammedan nation. Every man who could read or write was suspected of being a heretic in those days. Only one person in 40,000 could read or write. All thought was discouraged. The whole earth was ruled by the mitre and scepter, by the altar and throne, by fear and force, by ignorance and faith, by ghouls and ghosts. In the 15th century the following law was in force in England: Whosoever reads the scripture in the mother tongue shall forfeit land, cattle, life, and goods for themselves and their heirs forever, and should be condemned for heretics to God, enemies to the crown, and traitors to the land. During the period this law was in force, 39 were hanged and their bodies burned. In the 16th century men were burned because they failed to kneel to a procession of monks. Even the reformers, so called, had no idea of liberty only when in the minority. The moment they were clothed with power, they began to exterminate with fire and sword. Castillo, and I want you to recollect it, was the first minister in the world that declared in favor of universal toleration. Castillo was pursued by John Calvin like a wild beast. Calvin said that by such a monstrous doctrine he crucified Christ afresh, and they pursued that man until he died. Recollect it. They can't do that nowadays. You don't know how splendid I feel about the liberty I have. The horizon is filled with glory, and the air is filled with wings. If there are any in this world who think they had better not tell what they really think, because it will take bread from their little children, because it will take clothing from their families, don't do it. Don't make martyrs of yourselves. I don't believe in martyrdom. Go right along with them. Go to church and say amen as near the right place as you can. I will do your talking for you. They can't take the bread away from me. I will talk. Bodemus, a lawyer of France, wrote a few words in favor of freedom of conscience. Montaigne was the first to raise his voice against torture in France. But what was the voice of one man against the terrible cry of ignorant, infatuated, malevolent millions? I intend to do what little I can, and I am going to do it kindly. I am going to appeal to reason and to charity, to justice, to science, and to the future. For my part, I glory in the fact that in the New World, in the United States, liberty of conscience was first granted to man, and that the Constitution of the United States was the first great decree entered in the high court of human equity, forever divorcing church and state. It is the grandest step ever taken by the human race, and the Declaration of Independence was the first document that retired ghosts from politics. It is the first document that said authority does not come from the phantoms of the air. Authority is not from that direction. It comes from the people themselves. The Declaration of Independence enthroned man and dethroned the phantoms. You will ask what has caused this change in 300 years. I answer, the inventions and discoveries of the few, the brave thoughts and heroic utterances of the few, the acquisition of a few facts, getting acquainted with our mother, nature. Besides this, you must remember that every wrong in some way tends to abolish itself. It is hard to make a lie last always. A lie will not fit the truth. It will only fit another lie, told on purpose to fit it. Nothing but truth lives. The nobles and kings quarreled, the priests began to dispute, and the millions began to get their rights. In 1441 printing was discovered. At that time the past was a vast cemetery without an epitaph. The ideas of men had mostly perished in the brains that had produced them. Printing gives an opening for thought. It preserves ideas. It made it possible for a man to bequeath to the world the wealth of his thoughts. About the same time, or a little before, the Moors had gone into Europe, and it can be truthfully said that science was thrust into the brain of Europe upon the point of a Moorish lance. They gave us paper. And what is printing without paper? A bird without wings. I tell you, paper has been a splendid thing. The discovery of America, whose shores were trod by the restless feet of adventure and the people of every nation, out of this strange mingling of facts and fancies came the great republic. Every fact has pushed a superstition from the brain, and a ghost from the cloud. Every mechanical art is an educator. Every loom, every reaper, every mower, every steamboat, every locomotive, every engine, every press, every telegraph is a missionary of science and an apostle of progress. Every mill, every furnace with its wheels and levers, in which something is made for the convenience, for the use, and the comfort and the well-being of man, is my kind of church. and every schoolhouse is a temple. Education is the most radical thing in this world. To teach the alphabet is to inaugurate a revolution. To build a schoolhouse is to construct a fort. Every library is an arsenal filled with the weapons and ammunition of progress. Every fact is a monitor with sides of iron and a turret of steel. I thank the inventors and discoverers. I thank Columbus and Magellan. I thank Locke and Hume, Bacon and Shakespeare. I thank Fulton and Watt, Franklin and Morse, who made the lightning the messenger of man. I thank Luther for protesting against the abuses of the church, but denounce him because he was an enemy of liberty. I thank Calvin for writing a book in favor of religious freedom, but I abhor him because he burned Servetus. I thank the Puritans for saying that resistance to tyrants is obedience to God, and yet I am compelled to admit that they were tyrants themselves. I thank Thomas Paine because he was a believer in liberty. I thank Voltaire, that great man, who for half a century was the intellectual monarch of Europe, and who, from his throne at the foot of the Alps, pointed the finger of scorn at every hypocrite in Christendom. I thank the inventors, I thank the discoverers, the thinkers and the scientists, and I thank the honest millions who have toiled. I thank the brave men with brave thoughts. They are the atlases upon whose broad and mighty shoulders rests the grand fabric of civilization. They are the men who have broken, and are still breaking, the chains of superstition. We are beginning to learn that to swap off a superstition for a fact, to ascertain the real, is to progress. All that gives us better bodies and minds, and clothes and food and pictures, grander music, better heads, better hearts, and that makes us better husbands and wives, and better citizens. All these things combined produce what we call the progress of the human race. Man advances only as he overcomes the obstacles of nature. It is done by labor and thought. Labor is the foundation. Without great labor it is impossible to progress. Without labor on the part of those who conduct all great industries of life, of those who battle with the obstacles of the sea, on the part of the inventors, the discoverers, and the brave, heroic thinkers, no surplus is produced. And from the surplus produced by labor spring the schools and universities, the painters, the sculptors, the poets, the hopes, the loves, and the aspirations of the world. The surplus has given us the books. It has given us all there is of beauty and eloquence. I am aware there is a vast difference of opinion as to what progress is, and that many denounce my ideas. I know there are many worshipers of the past. They see no beauty in anything from which they do not blow the dust of ages with the breath of praise. They see nothing like the ancients, no orators, poets, or statesmen like those who have been dust for thousands of years. In a sermon on a certain evening some time ago, the Reverend Dr. McGee of Albany, New York, stated that Colonel Ingersoll, referring to Jesus Christ, called him a dirty little Jew. I denounce that as a dirty little lie. I have as much reverence for any man who ever did what he believed was right, and died in order to benefit mankind, as any man in this world. Do they treat an opponent with fairness? Are they investigating? Do they pull forward or do they hold back? Is science indebted to the church for a single fact? Let us know what it is. What church has been the asylum for a persecuted truth? What reform has been inaugurated by the church? Did the church abolish slavery? No. Who commenced it? Such men as Garrison and Pillsbury and Wendell Phillips. They were the titans that attacked the monster, and not a solitary one of them ever belonged to a church. Has the church raised its voice against war? No. Are men restrained by superstition? Are men restrained by what you call religion? I used to think they were not. Now I admit they are. No man has ever been restrained from the commission of a real crime, but from an artificial one he has. There was a man who committed murder. They got the evidence, but he confessed that he did it. What did you do it for? Money. Did you get any money? Yes. How much? 15 cents. What kind of man was he? A laboring man I killed. What did you do with the money? I bought liquor with it. Did he have anything else? I think he had some meat and bread. What did you do with that? I ate the bread and threw away the meat. It was Friday. So, you see, it will restrain in some things. Just to the extent that man has freed himself from the dominion of ghosts, he has advanced. To that extent he has freed himself from the tyrant's poison. Man has found that he must give liberty to others in order to have it himself. He has found that a master is a slave, that a tyrant is also a slave. He has found that governments should be administered by men for men, that the rights of all are to be protected, that woman is at least the equal for man, that men existed before books, that all creeds were made by men, that the few have a right to contradict what the pulpit asserts, that man is responsible to himself and to others. True religion must be free. Without liberty, the brain is a dungeon and the mind a convict. The slave may bow and cringe and crawl, but he cannot worship. He cannot adore. True religion is the perfume of the free and grateful air. True religion is the subordination of the passions to the intellect. It is not a creed. It is a life. The theory that is afraid of investigation is not deserving of a place in the human mind. I do not pretend to tell what all the truth is. I do not pretend to have fathomed the abyss, nor to have floated on outstretched wings level with the heights of thought. I simply plead for freedom. I denounce the cruelties and horrors of slavery. I ask for light and air for the souls of men. I say, take off those chains, break those manacles, free those limbs, release that brain. I plead for the right to think, to reason, to investigate. I ask that the future may be enriched with the honest thoughts of men. I implore every human being to be a soldier in the army of progress. I will not invade the rights of others. You have no right to erect your toll gates upon the highways of thought. You have no right to leap from the hedges of superstition and strike down the pioneers of the human race. You have no right to sacrifice the liberties of man upon the altars of ghosts. Believe what you may, preach what you desire, have all the forms and ceremonies you please, exercise your liberties in your own way, and extend to all others the same right. I attack the monsters, the phantoms of imagination that have ruled the world. I attack slavery. I ask for room for the human mind. Why should we sacrifice a real world that we have for one we know not of? Why should we enslave ourselves? Why should we forge fetters for our own hands? Why should we be the slaves of phantoms? Phantoms that we create ourselves. The darkness of barbarism was the womb of these shadows. In the light of science they cannot cloud the sky forever. They have reddened the hands of man with innocent blood. They made the cradle a curse and the grave a place of torment. They blinded the eyes and stopped the ears of the human race. They subverted all the ideas of justice by promising infinite rewards for finite virtues and threatening infinite punishment for finite offenses. I plead for light, for air, for opportunity. I plead for individual independence. I plead for the rights of labor and of thought. I plead for a chainless future. Let the ghosts go. Justice remains. Let them disappear. Men, women, and children are left. Let the monster fade away. The world remains, with its hills and seas and plains, with its seasons of smiles and frowns, its springs of leaf and bud, its summer of shade and flower, its autumn with the laden boughs, when the withered banners of the corn are still, and gathered fields are growing strangely wan, while death, poetic death, with hands that color whate'er they touch, weaves in the autumn wood her tapestries of gold and brown. The world remains, with its winters and homes and firesides, where grow and bloom the virtues of our race. All these are left, and music, with its sad and thrilling voice, and all there is of art and song and hope and love and aspiration high. All these remain. Let the ghosts go. We will worship them no more. Man is greater than these phantoms. Humanity is grander than all the creeds, than all the books. Humanity is the great sea, and these creeds and books and religions are but the waves of a day. Humanity is the sky, and these religions and dogmas and theories are but the mists and clouds, changing continually, destined finally to melt away. Let the ghosts go. We will worship them no more. Let them cover their eyeless sockets with their fleshless hands, and fade forever from the imaginations of men. End of Ingersoll's lecture on ghosts. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. This has been the second lecture from Lectures of Colonel R.G. Ingersoll, read for you by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina, during April 2007. Ingersoll's Lecture on Hell, Part 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Lectures of Colonel Robert Green Ingersoll. Lecture number 3, Ingersoll's Lecture on Hell. Ladies and gentlemen, the idea of a hell was born of revenge and brutality on the one side, and cowardice on the other. In my judgment, the American people are too brave, too charitable, too generous, too magnanimous to believe in the infamous dogma of an eternal hell. I have no respect for any human being who believes in it. I have no respect for the man who will pollute the imagination of childhood with that infamous lie. I have no respect for the man who will add to the sorrows of this world with the frightful dogma. I have no respect for any man who endeavors to put that infinite cloud, that infinite shadow over the heart of humanity. I want to be frank with you. I dislike this doctrine. I hate it. I despise it. I defy this doctrine. For a good many years, the learned intellects of Christendom have been examining into the religions of other countries in the world, the religions of the thousands that have passed away. They examined into the religions of Egypt, the religion of Greece, the religion of Rome, and of the Scandinavian countries. In the presence of the ruins of those religions, the learned men of Christendom insisted that those religions were baseless, that they are fraudulent. But they have all passed away. While this was being done, the Christianity of our day applauded, and when the learned men got through with the religions of other countries, they turned their attention to our religion. By the same mode of reasoning, by the same methods, by the same arguments that they used with the old religions, they were overturning the religion of our day. Why? Every religion in this world is the work of man. Every one. Every book has been written by man. Men existed before the books. If books had existed before man, I might admit there was such a thing as a sacred volume. In my judgment, man has made every religion and made every book. There is another thing to which I wish to call your attention. Man never had an idea, man will never have an idea, except those supplied to him by his surroundings. Every idea in the world that man has came to him by nature. Man cannot conceive of anything, the hint of which you have not received from your surroundings. You can imagine an animal with the hoof of a bison, with the pouch of the kangaroo, with the wings of an eagle, with the beak of a bird, and with the tail of the lion, and yet every point of this monster you borrowed from nature. Everything you can think of, everything you can dream of, is borrowed from your surroundings. Everything. And there is nothing on this earth coming from any other sphere whatever. Man has produced every religion in the world. And why? Because each generation bodes forth the knowledge and the belief of the people at the time it was made. And in no book is there any knowledge found except that of the people who wrote it. In no book is there found any knowledge except that of the time in which it was written. Barbarians have produced and always will produce barbarian religions. Barbarians have produced and always will produce ideas in harmony with their surroundings. And all the religions of the past were produced by barbarians, every one of them. We are making religions today. We are making religions tonight. That is to say, we are changing them. And the religion of today is not the religion of 1 year ago. What changed it? Science has done it. Education and the growing heart of man has done it. We are making these religions every day, and just to the extent that we become civilized ourselves will we improve the religion of our fathers. If the religion of 100 years ago compared with the religion of today is so low, what will it be in 1,000 years? If we continue making the inroads upon orthodoxy, which we have been making during the last 25 years, what will it be 50 years from tonight? It will have to be remonetized by that time, or else it will not be legal tender. In my judgment, every religion that stands by appealing to miracles is dishonor. Every religion in the world has denounced every other religion as a fraud. That proves to me that they all tell the truth about others. Why? Suppose Mr. Smith should tell Mr. Brown that he, Smith, saw a corpse get out of the grave, and that when he first saw it, it was covered with the worms of death, and that in his presence it was reclothed in healthy, beautiful flesh. And then suppose Mr. Brown should tell Mr. Smith, I saw the same thing myself. I was in a graveyard once, and I saw a dead man rise. Suppose then that Smith should say to Brown, you're a liar. And Brown should reply to Smith, and you're a liar. What would you think? It would simply be because Smith, never having seen it himself, didn't believe Brown, and Brown, never having seen it, didn't believe Smith had. Now, if Smith had really seen it, and Brown told him he had seen it too, then Smith would regard it as a corroboration of his story, and he would regard Brown as one of his principal witnesses. But on the contrary, he says, you never saw it. So when a man says, I was upon Mount Sinai, and there I met God, and he told me, stand aside and let me drown these people. And another man says to him, I was upon a mountain, and there I met the Supreme Brahma. And Moses says, that's not true, and contends that the other man never did see Brahma. And he contends that Moses never did see God. That is, in my judgment, proof that they both speak truly. Every religion, then, has charged every other religion with having been an unmitigated fraud. And yet, if any man had ever seen the miracle himself, his mind would be prepared to believe that another man had seen the same thing. Whenever a man appeals to a miracle, he tells what is not true. Truth relies upon reason and the undeviating course of all the laws of nature. Now we have a religion. That is, some people have. I do not pretend to have religion myself. I believe in living for this world. That's my doctrine. In living here, now, today, tonight. That's my doctrine. To make everybody happy that you can. Now let the future take care of itself. And if I ever touch the shores of another world, I will be just as ready and anxious to get into some remunerative employment as anybody else. Now we have got in this country a religion which men have preached for about 1800 years, and just in proportion as their belief in that religion has grown great, men have grown mean and wicked. Just in proportion as they have ceased to believe it, men have become just and charitable. And if they believe it tonight as they once believed it, I wouldn't be allowed to speak in the city of New York. It is from the coldness and infidelity of the churches that I get my right to preach. And I say it to their credit. Now we have a religion. What is it? They say in the first place that all this vast universe was created by a deity. I don't know whether it was or not. They say, too, that had it not been for the first sin of Adam, there would never have been any devil in this world. And if there had been no devil, there would have been no sin. And if there had been no sin, there never would have been any death. For my part, I am glad there was somebody had to die to give me room. And when my turn comes, I'll be willing to let somebody else take my place. But whether there is another life or not, if there is any being who gave me this, I shall thank him from the bottom of my heart, because, upon the whole, my life has been a joy. Now they say because of this first sin all men were consigned to eternal hell, and this because Adam was our representative. Well, I always had an idea that my representative ought to live somewhere about the same time I do. I always had an idea that I should have some voice in choosing my representative. And if I had a voice, I never should have voted for the old gentleman called Adam. Now, in order to regain man from the frightful hell of eternity, Christ himself came to this world and took upon himself flesh. And in order that we might know the road to eternal salvation, he gave us a book. And that book is called the Bible. And whenever that Bible has been read, men have immediately commenced cutting each other's throats. Wherever that Bible has been circulated, they have invented inquisitions and instruments of torture, and they commenced hating each other with all their hearts. But I am told now, we are all told, that this Bible is the foundation of civilization. But I say that this Bible is the foundation of hell. And we shall never get rid of the dogma of hell until we get rid of the idea that it is an inspired book. Now, what does the Bible teach? I am not going to talk about what this minister or that minister says it teaches. The question is, ought a man to be sent to eternal hell for not believing this Bible to be the work of a merciful Father? And the only way to find out is to read it. And a very few people do read it now. I will read a few passages. This is the book to be read in the schools in order to make our children charitable and good. This is the book that we must read in order that our children may have ideas of mercy, charity, and justice. Does the Bible teach mercy? Now be honest. I read, I will make mine arrows drunk with blood, and the sword shall devour flesh. Deuteronomy 32:42. Pretty good start for a merciful God. That thy foot may be dipped in the blood of thine enemies, and the tongue of thy dogs in the same. Psalms 98:23. Again, and the Lord thy God will put out those nations before thee by little and little. Thou mayest not consume them at once, lest the beasts of the field increase upon thee. Deuteronomy 7:22. But the Lord thy God shall deliver them unto thee, and shall destroy them with a mighty destruction until they be destroyed. and he shall deliver their kings into thine hand, and thou shalt destroy their name from under heaven. There shall no man be able to stand before thee until thou have destroyed them. Deuteronomy 7:23 and 24. So Joshua came, and all the people of war with him, against them by waters of Merom suddenly, and they fell upon them. And the Lord delivered them into the land of Israel, who smote them, and chased them into the great Zidon, and into Misrephothimaim, and unto the valley of Mizpeth eastward. And they smote them until they left them none remaining. And Joshua did unto them as the Lord bade him. He hewed their horses and burnt their chariots with fire. And Joshua at that time turned back and took Hazor, and smote the king thereof with the sword. For Hazor beforetime was the head of all those kingdoms. And they smote all the souls that were therein with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There was not any left to breathe. And he burnt Hazor with fire. And all the cities of those kings, and all the kings of them, did Joshua take, and smote them with the edge of the sword, and he utterly destroyed them, as Moses the servant of the Lord commanded. But as for the cities that stood still in their strength, Israel burnt none of them, save Hazor only. That did Joshua burn. And all the spoil of these cities and the cattle the children of Israel took for a prey unto themselves, but every man they smote with the edge of the sword. Brave. Until they had destroyed them, neither left they any to breathe, as the moral God had commanded them. As the Lord commanded Moses his servant, so did Moses command Joshua, and so did Joshua. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord commanded Moses. So Joshua took all that land, the hills, and all the south country, and all the land of Goshen, and the valley of the same, even from the Mount Halak that goeth up to Seir, even unto Baalgad in the valley of Lebanon under Mount Hermon, and all their kings he took, and smote them, and slew them. Joshua made war a long time with all those kings. There was not a city that made peace with the children of Israel, save the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gideon. All other they took in battle. For it was of the Lord to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, that he might destroy them utterly, and that they might have no favor, but that he might destroy them, as the Lord commanded Moses. And at that time came Joshua, and cut off the Anakims from the mountains, from Hebron, from Debit, from Anab, and from all the mountains of Judah, and from all the mountains of Israel. Joshua destroyed them utterly with their cities. There was none of the Anakims left in the land of the children of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod there remained. So Joshua took the whole land, according to all that the Lord said unto Moses. And Joshua gave it for an inheritance unto Israel, according to their divisions by their tribes. And the land rested from war. Joshua 11:7-23. When thou comest nigh unto a city to fight against it, then proclaim peace unto it. And if it shall be, if it make thee answer of peace, and open unto thee, then it shall be that all the people that is found therein shall be tributaries unto thee, and they shall serve thee. And if it will make no peace with thee, but will make war against thee, then thou shalt besiege it. And when the Lord thy God hath delivered it into thine hands, thou shalt smite every male thereof with the edge of the sword. But the women, and the little ones, and the cattle, and all that is in the city, even all the spoil thereof, shalt thou take unto thyself, and thou shalt eat the spoil of thine enemies, which the Lord thy God hath given thee. Thus shalt thou do unto all the cities, which are very far off from thee, which are not of the cities of these nations. But of the cities of these people, which the Lord thy God doth give thee for an inheritance, thou shalt save alive nothing that breatheth, but thou shalt utterly destroy them. Deuteronomy 20:10-17. Neither the old men, nor the women, nor the maidens, nor the sweet dimpled babe smiling upon the lap of his mother were to be spared. And he said unto them, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, a merciful God indeed, Put every man his sword by his side, and go in and out from gate to gate throughout the camp, and slay every man his brother, and every man his companion, and every man his neighbor. Exodus 32:27. Now recollect, these instructions were given to an army of invasion, and the people who were slayed were guilty of the crime of fighting for their homes. Oh, most merciful God! The Old Testament is full of curses, vengeance, jealousy, and hatred, and of barbarity and brutality. Now do you not for one moment believe that these words were written by the most merciful God? Don't pluck from the heart the sweet flowers of piety and crush them by superstition. Do not believe that God ever ordained the murder of innocent women and helpless babes. Do not let this supposition turn your hearts into stone, when anything is said to have been written by the most merciful God, and the thing is not merciful. Then I deny it, and say he never wrote it. I will live by the standard of reason, and if thinking in accordance with reason takes me to perdition, then I will go to hell with my reason rather than to heaven without it. Now, does this Bible teach political freedom, or does it teach political tyranny? Does it teach a man to resist oppression? Does it teach a man to tear from the throne of tyranny the crowned thing and robber called a king? Let us see. Let every soul be subject to the higher powers, for there is no power but of God, the powers that are ordained of God. Romans 12:1. All the kings and princes and governors and thieves and robbers that happened to be in authority were placed there by the infinite Father of all. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God. And when George Washington resisted the power of George III, he resisted the power of God. And when our fathers said resistance to tyrants is obedience to God, they falsified the Bible itself. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, revenger, to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore ye must needs be subject not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. Romans 13:4-5. I deny this wretched doctrine. Wherever the sword of rebellion is drawn to protect the rights of man, I am a rebel. Wherever the sword of rebellion is drawn to give man liberty, to clothe him in all his just rights, I am on the side of that rebellion. I deny that the rulers are crowned by the Most High. The rulers are the people, and the presidents and others are but the servants of the people. All authority comes from the people, and not from the aristocracy of the air. Upon these texts of Scripture which I have just read rest the thrones of Europe, and these are the voices that are repeated from age to age by brainless kings and heartless kings. Does the Bible give woman her rights? Is this Bible humane? Does it treat woman as she ought to be treated, or is it barbarian? Let us see. Let the woman learn in silence with all subjection. 1 Timothy 2:11. If a woman would know anything, let her ask her husband. Imagine the ignorance of a lady who had only that source of information. But I suffer not a woman to teach, not to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. For Adam was first formed, then Eve. What magnificent reason! And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression. Splendid. But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. That is to say, there is as much difference between the woman and man as there is between Christ and man. This is the liberty of woman. For the man is not of the woman, but the woman is of the man. It was the man's cut till that was taken, not the woman's. Neither was the man created for the woman. Well, what was he created for? But the woman was created for the man. Wives, submit yourselves unto your husbands as unto the Lord. There's liberty. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Good again. Even the Savior didn't put man and woman upon an equality. The man could divorce the wife, but the wife could not divorce the husband. And according to the Old Testament, the mother had to ask for forgiveness for being the mother of babes. Splendid. Here is something from the Old Testament. When thou goest forth to war against thine enemies, and the Lord thy God hath delivered them into thine hands, and thou hast taken them captive, and seest among the captives a beautiful woman, and has a desire unto her, that thou wouldst have her to thy wife, then thou shalt bring her to thine house, and she shall shave her head and pare her nails. Deuteronomy 21:10-12. That is in self-defense, I suppose. This sacred book, this foundation of human liberty, of morality, does it teach concubinage and polygamy? Read the 31st chapter of Numbers. Read the 21st chapter of Deuteronomy. Read the blessed lives of Abraham, of David, or of Solomon. And then tell me that the sacred scripture does not teach polygamy and concubinage. All the language of the world is not sufficient to express the infamy of polygamy. It makes a man a beast and woman a stone. It destroys the fireside and makes virtue an outcast. And yet it is the doctrine of the Bible, the doctrine defended by Luther and Melanchthon. It takes from our language those sweetest words, father, husband, wife, and mother, and takes us back to barbarism and fills our hearts with the crawling, slimy serpents of loathsome lust. Does the Bible teach the existence of devils? Of course it does. Yes, it teaches not only the existence of a good being, but a bad being. This good being had to have a home. That home was heaven. This bad being had to have a home, and that home was hell. This hell is supposed to be nearer to earth than I would care to have it, and to be peopled with spirits, spooks, hobgoblins, and all the fiery shapes with which the imagination of ignorance and fear could people that horrible place. And the Bible teaches the existence of hell, and this big devil, and all these little devils. The Bible teaches the doctrine of witchcraft, and makes us believe that there are sorcerers and witches, and that the dead could be raised by the power of sorcery. Does anybody believe it now? Then said Saul unto his servants, Seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servants said to him, Behold, there is a woman that hath a familiar spirit at Endor. And Saul disguised himself, and put on other raiment. And he went, and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night. And he said, I pray thee, divine unto me by the familiar spirit, and bring me him up, whom I shall name unto thee. That was a pretty good spiritual seance. And the woman said unto him, Behold, thou knowest what Saul hath done, how he hath cut off those that have familiar spirits, and the wizards out of the land. Wherefore then layest thou a snare for my life, to cause me to die? And Saul sware to her by the Lord, saying, As the Lord liveth, there shall be no punishment happen to thee for this thing. Then said the woman, Whom shall I bring up unto thee? And he said, Bring me up Samuel. And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice. And the woman spoke to Saul, saying, Why hast thou deceived me? For thou art Saul. And the king said unto her, Be not afraid, for what sawest thou? And the woman said unto Saul, I saw gods ascending out of the earth. And he said unto her, What form is he of? And she said, An old man cometh up, and he is covered with a mantle. And Saul perceived that it was Samuel, and he stooped with his face to the ground and bowed himself. 1 Samuel 28, 7-14. In another place he declares that witchcraft is an abomination unto the Lord. He wanted no rivals in this business. Now what does the New Testament teach? Then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward an hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. But he answered and said, It is written, Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Then the devil taketh him up into the holy city, and setteth him on a pinnacle of the temple, and saith unto him, If thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down, for it is written, He shall give his angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. Jesus said unto him, It is written again, Thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. Matthew 4, 1-7. Is it possible that anyone can believe that the devil absolutely took God Almighty and put him on the pinnacle of the temple, and endeavored to persuade him to jump down? Is it possible? Again, the devil taketh him up into an exceeding high mountain, and showeth him all the kingdoms of the world, and the glory of them, and saith unto him, All these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. Then saith Jesus unto him, Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. Matthew 4, 8-10. Now the devil must have known at that time that he was God, and God at that time must have known that the other was the devil. How could the latter be conceived to have the impudence to promise God a world in which he did not have a tax title to an inch of land? Then the devil leaveth him, and behold, angels came and ministered unto him. Matthew 4:11. And they came over unto the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gadarenes. And when he was come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs. And no man could bind him, no, not with chains, because that he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces, neither could any man tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. But when he saw Jesus afar off, he came and worshipped him, and cried with a loud voice, and said, What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee by God that thou torment me not. For he said unto him, Come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. And he asked him, What is thy name? And he answered, saying, My name is Legion, for we are many. And he besought him much that he would not send them away out of the country. Now there was there nigh unto the mountains a great herd of swine feeding. And all the devils besought him, saying, Send us into the swine, that we may enter into them. And forthwith Jesus gave them leave. And the unclean spirits went out and entered into the swine. And the herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea. They were about 2,000, and were choked in the sea. Mark 5, 1-13. Now I will ask a question. Should reasonable men in the 19th century in the United States of America believe that that was an actual occurrence? If my salvation depends upon believing that, I am lost. I have never experienced the signs by which it is said a believer may be known. I deny all the witch stories in this world. These fables of devils have covered the world with blood. They have filled the world with fear, and I am going to do what I can to free the world of these insatiate monsters, small and great. They have filled the world with monsters. They have made the world a synonym of liar and ferocity. And it is this book that ought to be read in all the schools, this book that teaches man to enslave his brother. If it is larceny to steal the result of labor, how much more is it larceny to steal the laborer himself? Moreover, of the children of the strangers that do sojourn among you, of them shall ye buy, and of their families that are with you, which they begat in your land, and they shall be your possession. And ye shall take them as an inheritance for your children after you, to inherit them for a possession. They shall be your bondmen forever. But over your brethren, the children of Israel, ye shall not rule one over another with rigor. Leviticus 25:45-46. Why? Because they are not as good as you will buy of the heathen round about? Now these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them. If thou buy an Hebrew servant, 6 years shall he serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. If he came in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he were married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master have given him a wife, and she have borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. If the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him unto the judges. He shall also bring him to the door, or unto the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. Exodus 21:1-6. This is the doctrine which has ever lent itself to the chains of slavery, and makes a man imprison himself rather than desert his wife and children. I hate it. Now listen to the New Testament, the tidings of great joy for all people. Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters, according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in singleness of your heart, as unto Christ. Not with eye service as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. Ephesians 6:5-6. Splendid doctrine. Servants, be subject to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the forward. For this is thankworthy, if a man for conscience towards God endure grief, suffering wrongfully. 1 Peter 2:18-19. Servants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh. He was afraid they might not work all the time, so he adds, not with the eye service as men pleasers, but in the singleness of heart, fearing God. Read the 21st chapter of Exodus 7-11. And if a man sell his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as the men servants do. If she please not her master who hath betrothed her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed. To sell her unto a strange nation he shall have no power, seeing he hath dealt deceitfully with her. And if he have betrothed her unto his son, he shall deal with her after the manner of daughters. If he take him another wife, her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage shall he not diminish. And if he do not these 3 unto her, then shall she go out free, without money. Servants, be obedient to your masters, is the salutation of the most merciful God to one who works for nothing, and who receives upon his naked back the lash, as legal tender for service performed. Servants, be obedient to your masters, is the salutation of the most merciful God to the slave mother bending over her infant's grave. Servants, be obedient to your masters, is the salutation to a man endeavoring to escape pursuit, followed by savage bloodhounds, and with his eye fixed upon the northern star. This book ought to be read in the schools, so that our children will love liberty. What does this same book say of the rights of little children? Let us see how they are treated by the most merciful God. If a man have a stubborn and rebellious son, which will not obey the voice of his father, or the voice of his mother, and that when they have chastened him will not hearken unto them, then shall his father and his mother lay hold of him, and bring him out unto the elders of his city, and unto the gate of his place, And they shall say unto the elders of his city, This our son is stubborn and rebellious, he will not obey our voice, he is a glutton and a drunkard. And all the men of his city shall stone him with stones that he die. So shalt thou put evil away from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear. Deuteronomy 21:18-21. Abraham was commanded to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice, and he intended to obey. The boy was not consulted. Did you ever hear the story of Jephthah's daughter? Returning him, Jephthah said, And Jephthah vowed a vow unto the Lord, and said, If thou shalt without fail deliver the children of Ammon into mine hands, then it shall be that whatsoever cometh forth of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. So Jephthah passed over into the children of Ammon to fight against them, and the Lord delivered them into his hands. And he smote them from Aroer even till thou come to Minnith, even 20 cities, and unto the plain of the vineyards, with a very great slaughter. Thus the children of Ammon were subdued before the children of Israel. And Jephthah came to Mizpah unto his house, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with timbrels and with dance, and she was his only child. Besides her he had neither son nor daughter. And it came to pass when he saw her, that he rent his clothes, and said, Alas, my daughter, thou hast brought me very low, and thou art one of them that trouble me, for I have opened my mouth unto the Lord, and I cannot go back. And she said unto him, My father, if thou hast opened thy mouth unto the Lord, do to me according to that which hath proceeded out of thy mouth. Forasmuch as the Lord hath taken vengeance for thee of thine enemies, even to the children of Ammon. And she said unto her father, Let this thing be done for me. Let me alone 2 months, that I may go up and down upon the mountains, and bewail my virginity, I and my fellows. And he said, Go. And he sent her away for 2 months, and she went with her companions, and bewailed her virginity upon the mountains. And it came to pass at the end of 2 months, that she returned unto her father, who did with her according to his vow which he had vowed. Is there in the history of the world a sadder story than this? Can a God who would accept such a sacrifice be worthy of the worship of civilized men? I believe in the rights of children. I plead for the republic of home, for the democracy of the fireside, and for this I am called a heathen and a devil by those who believe in the cheerful and comforting doctrine of eternal damnation. Read the book of Job. Read that God met the devil and asked him where he had been, and he said, Walking up and down the country. And the Lord said to him, Have you noticed my man Job over there, how good he is? And the devil said, Of course he's good. You give him everything he wants. Just take away his property and he'll curse you. You just try it. And he did try it, and took away his goods. But Job still remained good. The devil laughed and said he had not been tried enough. Then the Lord touched his flesh, but he was still true. Then he took away his children, but he remained faithful. And in the end, to show how much Job made by his fidelity, his property was all doubled, and he had more children than ever. If you have a child and you love it, would you be satisfied with a God who would destroy it and endeavor to make it up by giving you another that was better looking? No! You want that one. You want no other. And yet this is the idea of the love of children taught in the Bible. End of part 1 of Ingersoll's lecture on hell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain.